Hey everybody, welcome back to the Saltworks podcast. I'm your host, Hallie Dye. Lindsay's not with us today, sadly, but we still have a great show for you. We have on the podcast today Hannah Hughes from Denver, Colorado, recently from Denver, Colorado, and she's an author, she's a podcaster, she's a barista, she's a mom, a full-time working mom. She just is a wealth of wisdom. I cannot wait for you to hear her story. She shares with us this history of growing up in the church and having these connotations of what she thought a quote unquote good Christian was and should or shouldn't struggle with. And she shares with us how the Lord dismantled that in her life. Yes, in some messy ways, but in a beautiful story of redemption and learning who He was. And so she's going to share with us topics about mental health, and we're going to dive into that and the nuances of that conversation as best we can. And about redefining purpose. Do we really understand how God has given us purpose in every season? And she has such a beautiful way of saying that. She helps us have a litmus test between what is striving and what's working with excellence. How do we know if we're really abiding? I can't wait for you to listen to this episode. So here's my conversation with Hannah. Hey, Hannah, welcome to the Saltworks podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I feel so excited to be here.
It is so exciting. I'm so honored that you're here with us. We're excited to get to know you more and hear your story. So thank you for coming. I know you have a full-time job and you're busy, and this is taking time to be with us. So thank you.
Oh my goodness, yeah. I feel honored to be here.
Well, we always ask in the beginning of every episode, who is Hannah Hughes? What should we know about you?
Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, I would say the bulk of my life is taken up by being a wife and a mom to two littles. I have a 6-year-old son who just started kindergarten this year, and our daughter just turned 2. So that's what my most of my day-to-day life looks like. And then outside of that, I also am a barista and a social media events coordinator at a coffee shop that my friend runs. And so that is a fun part of my life. And then another layer outside of that is I'm an author, a speaker, podcaster, and this is what I really love to do and just love having these conversations that talk about the real and the hard everyday faith for women. I just so much of my story was not getting to talk about those things. So now I feel really excited and fired up that I get to do that more and more. So that's
Yeah.
like a little slice of what my life looks like on a daily basis.
Yeah, that's a lot. You're doing a
Yeah.
lot, which is amazing. And I know a lot. And so thank you for your sacrifice. Um, because we need people to do those things.
Yeah.
Tell us where you're recording from. Y'all actually are in a season of transition and you moved not that long ago. I mean,
Yeah.
tell us where you're recording from and what life kind of looks like for y'all right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm born and raised in Texas, and I had lived there my whole life until last year when we moved from DFW to the Denver area, which is where we are now. So it has
Yeah.
been quite a transition leaving
Yeah.
both of our parents and most of everyone we know.
Wow.
But it has been so sweet. We came off of a season, and the last few years of our time in Texas were really hard. I had gone
Mm,
through a season of miscarriages and then finally was
mm,
pregnant with our daughter, and that pregnancy was really hard. Ended up with a ton of complications, and then she was in the NICU. And at the same time, we were 3 days from closing on a house and it fell through. So we felt like
mm.
everything was kind of uprooted. We were going through some church transitions at the time as well. So we were like, God, what are you doing? We feel like everything is kind of up in the air. And then we realized, since everything is up in the air, we're not tied down to anything. And we have this opportunity to maybe start fresh. And we had always dreamt about moving somewhere else. We love the mountains. And so my brother moved out here to be with his wife, where she grew up, and we started visiting and just fell in love with Colorado. So here we are. And it's only been a
Wow.
year, but we absolutely love it. And it has been amazing and hard and crazy and wonderful.
That is awesome. Y'all are wild. I mean,
Yeah.
That's the best though. I love hearing that. That's so
It
fun.
is. It
I
is
mean,
fun.
I say fun. I know you mentioned a lot of things that
Yeah.
preceded, but going, you know what? We can change things up. Like we're allowed to do that. That is such a
Yeah.
fun thought that sometimes we cannot break that ceiling. I feel like,
Oh my goodness. Yes,
like we
absolutely.
don't.
Well, it's really interesting because my husband and I are very different. Like I said, I lived in the same city for the first 29 years of my life. My husband grew up as a missionary kid. So he actually grew up in Asia and he's used to moving
Wow.
all over, loves different cultures, loves travel. And so when he was like, "Yeah, we could totally move," I'm like terrified. And he's like, "It'll be great. It's so easy. Do this all the time." So I'm like, okay, we'll take a chance. But we have been so blessed. Like God has just really brought us amazing friends and
Mm.
community. And yeah, I'm like, okay, I was terrified about making a terrible decision for us and our kids, but we were like, you know what? It's actually worked out really nicely. So I'm glad we just took the leap.
That's awesome. I love that you said that because we've said this quite a few times on the last in the last few episodes, and I feel like it's a theme the Lord keeps bringing up. But like so often, we feel like when we make a decision for our lives, like that feels big. Like, oh my goodness, how do I protect my kids from this? And it's like
Right.
you don't, like if he's your shepherd, he's also their shepherd at the same time. Like,
That's so true.
and it that is a hard thing to hold, when I have a decision here and whatever I decide is going to change their lives. But it's also like, I think one of the things the Lord's teaching me lately, and I feel like i- this will resonate with you because of things we've talked about, but like, I can't protect my kids from my calling. Like,
Mm,
if the Lord calls me to do something, I can't protect them from the effects of that. But like, that's not, he doesn't intend that, And so I
yeah.
look at y'all making this move. Like, so my father in law is the pastor at our church, and I can't, it's 20 something years they've been here, and I can't remember what the number is now. But like they moved from Texas, and it was when they tell the story, it was like they almost didn't come, but it's like my kids wouldn't be here, like I would never
Yes.
have met my husband. Like, you never know like what your kid's story will be. And it won't be this, you know, this your calling ruined it. It'll be like, no, because of this, I met this person or I did this thing or I got this job. And it's just cool. It's cool to see it
Yes.
in the middle of that unfolding.
Right. I totally relate to that.
That is so fun. Okay, so you mentioned a little bit about you I think you said something along the lines of you loved getting to talk about all these things because when you're growing up you didn't have that
Mhm.
opportunity. What did you mean by that? Did you grow up in church? Did you grow up a believer? Like what does your
Yeah.
testimony look like in that regard?
Yes. Oh my goodness. Okay. So I grew up in Texas, like I said, which we sometimes refer to as the belt buckle of the Bible Belt, like smack dab in the South. And I was, Sunday after I was born, I was at church and then I was there every time the door was open after that. And I went to
Yeah.
private Christian school growing up where I had Bible class every day. And then
Mm,
eventually I went to Bible college and I did missions and I went to worship school. And I've just, it has been my world since day one, and it's very normal to me. But I grew up in that kind of environment that it was so familiar to me that it felt a lot like information. It felt a lot
mm,
like, oh, I know how to check the boxes. This girl can put on her Sunday best. I can perform my way through life. No problem. Okay. I know all the scriptures. I've memorized them. All the things. And so that was kind of my background growing up. So when I got into junior high, preteen, into my teen years, and I started
mm,
struggling with some things, I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. This is not compatible with what I thought a good Christian looked like. Like, good
mm,
Christians don't struggle with things like mental health. No way. We don't talk about that. Good Christians don't struggle with insecurities like this and body image. Like, it felt like I couldn't talk about those things because if I did, I
mm.
was admitting that there was something wrong with me.
Yeah.
And so for a long time, I really hid my struggles. And of course, we know that's not helpful at all. And so it just boiled beneath the surface for years. And I just kept pretending, putting on a face. I was the good Christian girl. And then when I was about 15 years old, it got to a point where I just really could not keep pretending anymore. And I ended up suicidal at 15. And
Mhm.
I remember God intervened in my life the craziest way. This night that I had planned to end my life, a friend had told their mom that they noticed how bad I was struggling. And their mom told my mom. So while I was upstairs in my room planning to end my life, my mom was downstairs in her room right under mine praying and interceding for me.
Mm.
And I woke up the next morning. All I remember is just crying. I fell asleep. I woke up the next morning. It was a Sunday. My parents took me to church. And so
Yeah.
thank God it unfolded the way that it did, because then my parents, the cat was out of the bag. I could not hide it anymore. And I was, number one, furious. And I was like, well, I failed. I thought this was going to be my way out, because if I can't be a perfect Christian, at least if I end my life, I can go be with God. And I
Mm.
just felt like such a disappointment. And so my parents sat me down with my youth pastor's wife, who was also a teacher at my school. It was my whole world was this bubble. And so we sat
Mm.
down, and my parents just said, What's going on? We love you and we want to help you." And I was shocked, because I thought that a good Christian was good at hiding all the hard things or didn't have the hard things. And so to for the first time to have someone see my brokenness and my mess and say, "I love you. I want to help you with this." I
Mm.
didn't know that's what a loving relationship could look like through struggles, because I never let myself struggle before. So fast forward, I go on this healing journey that in the beginning I didn't even want or ask for. And I end up, still struggling. I gave my life to the Lord around that time. And I thought, okay, I'm getting real about my faith. I'm moving from information about God to a real relationship. And I'm going to make this faith thing my own. It's not just my parents' faith that I'm tagging along with.
Mhm.
And life goes on, and I realize, oh, like, you can be a real Christian and still have struggles. Just because you struggled in the past doesn't mean you're exempt
Mm.
from future pain and suffering. And so, I ended up going on to experience sexual abuse and trauma. And then more recently, I went through a season of miscarriages, like I mentioned. And for the first time in my life, I could not pretend anymore. And I could not keep pushing through, because I'm an achiever girl. I'm a go getter.
Mhm.
I can do the thing and push through. But
Mhm.
when I was going through that season of miscarriages where I felt like even my body couldn't show up anymore, that I had nothing else to give. I was like, I
Mhm.
cannot perform in this season. There's nothing I can do to prove myself worthy or good or lovable in this season. And I feel
Mm.
like that was a moment where God was like, I can work with that. You do not have to strive. It's not about being a good Christian. It's about
Mm.
resting in my goodness, kind of like that. Let me take care of you. So I moved from this shame and wanting to hide my struggles out of this insecurity and thinking, oh, if people knew what I've been through, they would not want
Mhm.
me to speak on a stage. They would not want to be my friend. They would not. And then I moved into the season of like, the Lord actually wants me to be hidden in Him. It's a different kind of hiddenness that is not based in shame. It's
Mm.
completely rooted in love. And it changed my life. And for the first time in recent years, as an adult in my 30s, I finally got it in my heart, what I knew from scripture in my head, that God uses our struggles to bring us closer to Him. Like, it's this opportunity for relationship, and it's not something that takes away from our purpose. It actually builds onto the testimony He's writing in our lives. And so that's kind of where I live now, where it's like, I wish I would have known
Mhm.
when I was struggling with
Mhm.
those things and fighting and striving so hard to hide it all and be a good Christian, that
Yeah.
being a quote, good Christian doesn't mean we don't lack pain or struggles.
Mm.
It means that we trust in a good God in the midst of those things. So that's the short version of how I got from there to here today, where I'm just passionate about talking about it, because I know now that I'm not the only one who struggles, and we can hold both the suffering and the hope in relationship with Jesus.
That's exactly right. Mm, that's so good. I mean, just the whole thread was just beautiful of like
Mhm.
going from I thought this to I experienced this to I now know this and profess this to others. What
Yeah.
has that looked like for you regarding specifically mental health? Like, do you look
Mm.
back and feel like healed you from that? Is that something that you continued to walk through in adolescence, even now? What has your journey looked like regarding that specifically? And I mean, how have you learned to walk alongside other Christians who maybe have ongoing and they've prayed for healing and that's not been
Yeah.
the story?
Yeah, I love this question because it has come up so many times in different ways in my story, and just I'll give like a little funny story to kind of like explain my ups and downs with this whole holding the tension of mental health and faith and all that. After I, started my healing journey as a young college girl, I wrote a book about my testimony and about the power of overcoming and the God's work of healing in my life because he healed me from so much. And I talk about my mental health struggles in the book, and I talk about the specific moment where I felt like God just healed me. In this moment, we had a church service or something where I just felt like I didn't need medication for my depression anymore. And I was totally convicted of that. And so I stopped taking my medicine, and it was miraculous. Like, I went to the psychiatrist. She was like, "That's a terrible idea. You should never do that." And I was like, I didn't even know. Like, I just felt like God healed me. And so then I was off meds, and I was like, I am healed. I no longer struggle with depression, anxiety, mental health. Well, then I become a mom like 10 years later, and I have postpartum depression. And I'm like, nope, I'm healed. I don't struggle with this anymore. I don't claim that. I don't speak that over myself, those kinds of things, right? And then I start walking through the season of miscarriages, and I'm trying to parent my toddler, but I don't even have the motivation to get myself out of bed or open my Bible. Like, I can barely function. And I get
Mhm.
diagnosed with postpartum depression and, mental health diagnosis in that season. And my therapist recommended I get back on medication, and I felt like such a failure. I was
Mhm.
like, "No, God healed me of this. God healed me of this. I don't wanna get back on medication." Um, quote, "Good Christians don't do that." Like, my faith is strong. Like, I thought that I believed for healing. And I had so many loving friends and mentors and my mom and people who just were like, "There's no shame in that." No one would tell a diabetic not to take insulin, and if they didn't, that their faith wasn't strong enough. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
and I know that mental health is a very nuanced conversation. And so for me, the position that I take when it comes to mental health and medication is just like it's what I needed in that season to get myself to a baseline where I could process my pain in a healthy way. I
Mhm.
couldn't do it before. I couldn't even get myself up in the morning. And so I decided to get back on medication so that I could heal. And God used that season. And something that I felt like, this, like it was on me somehow for my healing. Like
Mhm.
my faith did the healing. And now that I'm
Mhm.
struggling again, does that mean that my faith isn't good enough? Like, what do I need to do better? Do I need to pray more, pray away my mental health struggles?
Mhm.
And what I have learned more recently is I've talked to more and more women who also struggle with mental health and have different kinds of diagnosis. Is that mental health struggles are something that we all may struggle with through this life because it's a part of getting well. Like we are triune beings, just like God is. We're made in his image. So we're spirit, soul, body. And on this side of heaven, we're just going to interact in those three areas in ways that reflect the brokenness of this world. And it doesn't reflect poorly on our faith or how good we are. Like it doesn't determine how good we are at all. Like it's not a measuring stick for how good of a Christian we are if we struggle with mental health. And I truly used to think that. I thought, oh, if I'm
Mhm.
depressed, I just need to choose joy. And
Mhm.
that's not always the case. Whether
Mhm.
the brokenness of this world for you comes up more in your body or it comes up more in your mind and your heart,
Mhm.
like, it doesn't mean that you're less because one is a hidden struggle that's not talked about as much as maybe something that shows up on the outside. And so
Mhm.
I've kind of I don't know, there's a lot of wrestling through that I think that a lot of Christians do, but the main thing is that I had to learn that there's no shame in struggling with mental health because God can heal and I can struggle still on this side of heaven, if that answers your question.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, man, so many good things there. I'm going to show my nerdy side for a second. Um, because I often think of this quote. I think it's in the last Harry Potter. I don't know if you are a Harry Potter fan.
Yes.
I am unabashedly a huge Harry Potter fan, but I think it's in the last book where Harry asked Dumbledore, like, "Is this all happening in my head, or is this real,
Mm,
or is this all happening in my head?" And Dumbledore says, "Of course, it's all happening in your head, Harry. But why should that mean it isn't real?" And
mm,
like that right there, like whether someone is struggling with fear or anxiety or depression or doubt, I mean, fill in the blank, like their perception is their reality.
mhm.
Like you don't see Jesus sit down with anyone in the Bible and say, "That's not a thing." You
Yep.
sit down and you see him meet the need that they have, you
Mm,
know, and you sit
yes.
down and you see them meet them where they are. And so you take that and you put it into mental health, and the science behind that is that your brain is just as physical as your legs. I mean,
Mm,
like you you have levels of dopamine and serotonin and all these neurotransmitters that are um that I mean, all this has to function a certain way. And like
mhm.
you throw in, hormones that are in our food these days and all these, I
Yeah.
mean, there's a lot. There's a lot. The possibilities are endless of things we could look into, and the effect of phones and
Mhm,
technology and all of these things that disrupt that. And like of course we
mhm,
have these issues, and like
mhm.
also the Lord knew we would be here, like he knew we would be here with this technology. He knew we would be here with these struggles, like,
Yeah.
and his grace is sufficient. And like we talked about that verse, you and I, about motherhood on your podcast,
Mhm,
and about my grace is sufficient for you. And
mhm.
like we can take that verse and we can go, well, if his grace is sufficient for us, then like I shouldn't need the medication,
Yep.
and I've used this example before, but like when you look at the life of Job,
Mm,
was that a spiritual attack on his life? Absolutely. We're told it was from the very beginning. Was it
yeah.
also physical? Mm-hmm. It was. He felt those
Yes.
boils. If he'd have had ointment, he'd have put him on those boils. Like, you know what I
Yes.
mean? Like, you know what I'm saying? And so it's
Yeah.
like, can it be a spiritual attack and a physical manifestation of that? 100% it can, because we
Yep.
saw that in scripture, and that can apply to mental health. And
Yes.
but I think about that verse and think, like, if we take that one piece, like, out of context, it could be like, well, his grace is sufficient. That's all we need. But
Right.
it was in response to Paul saying, please take this thorn from my side.
Yes.
And the Lord telling him no.
Yep.
His response to, would you please remove this and heal me from this specific thing that we're not told what it is, although some have speculated if it was a form
Mhm,
of mental affliction, that his answer is no. In
mhm.
that affliction, my grace is sufficient for you, and my power is made perfect in your weakness. And so it's
Yes.
like there's all kinds of healing that we think healing has to look just like this. But what if healing is medication? What if healing is
Mm.
you talking about it and bringing healing into someone's life, of going, oh my goodness, I didn't know I was allowed to struggle. Like,
Right.
you know what I'm
Yeah,
saying? And so,
exactly.
so
Yeah, and I
powerful.
think something along those same lines is, like I when I was growing up and starting to struggle with this, mental health was not a topic that was talked about in the church world at all. My dad grew up Catholic and he had no concept. He's a great dad, but he had no idea what he didn't know, right? And so when I first started struggling and I didn't have a name for it yet, he would say things like, "You got to stop being so negative." Or, these things are the kind of messages that I would hear from people who didn't understand, or in the church world saying, like, it's a sin issue. And I think that there's something specifically in the mental health conversation where it can be both and, just like you said. I do think
Mhm.
that mental health is a byproduct of brokenness in our world. Like,
Mhm.
because of this world is broken, our bodies are broken, our minds are broken, our spirit is broken until it's reconciled with the Lord, right? And sin is in our world. And when we have sin in our lives, whether it's something that's done to us or something that we engage in knowingly or unknowingly, sin affects our mental condition. So
Mhm.
things like, I don't know, I'll just use gluttony, for example. This is one that's also not talked about really ever. But if you are not taking care of your body, If
Mhm.
you are engaging in things that are not God's best design for how to care for your body, it's going to affect your mind. If you
Mm.
are not taking care of your mind, it's going to affect the way that you interact in relationships, So it's
Mhm.
all connected. So I think there are some things where it's like, yes, we do have an ownership. God equips
Mhm.
us in his word and by his spirit on how to care for our bodies and our spirit and our soul, which includes our mind and will and emotions. And at the same time, there's just brokenness in this world. So I think if we're able to do what we can to care for our bodies and our mind and our spirit,
Mhm.
then it helps with the mental health struggle. But it comes from both sides, if that makes sense. And I think that's a good
Mhm.
differentiation for people to make, because it's not just you have a sin issue or your faith isn't good enough. And it's not just like, oh, get on meds and it'll be a band-aid and it'll fix all your problems, right? Like there's a lot of factors
Mhm.
here. But I
Right.
think that yeah, there's like a lot of nuances, obviously, but that piece I think is not talked about a lot.
That's good. Thank you for sharing that.
Mm.
I'm curious to know, God is God. He does not change. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. And yet, with each season, we come to know him more deeply. I mean, use Job as an example. Like, my ears have heard of you, and now my eyes see. Like,
Mm.
I, what does he mean? Like, he's experienced God in a way that he had not before suffering. I'm
Yeah.
curious to know, like, what have you learned about God because of your mental health journey?
Hmm. I love that question. Specifically, after my miscarriage season, I was pregnant with my daughter. And finally, it's like the beautiful miracle story of our triple rainbow baby. It's a girl, and I'm so excited. But then I start developing all these complications. And I remember going to an OB appointment and got another diagnosis for something else that was going wrong. Thankfully, the baby was okay, but my body, I just felt like my body was just falling apart and letting me down. And so I got in my car and I was so frustrated with my body and with God. And I was like, Lord, this is supposed to be the redemption story. Why is everything sucking, to be honest? And
Mhm.
I just remember feeling this sense of his presence and just being like, this is the redemption story. This is the redemption story. Just because it's not going like you planned it would, or just because there's parts of brokenness that are still infiltrating it, doesn't mean that my will is not being done. And like I
Mhm.
said, my daughter was born, she was in the NICU. I had complications. There was a lot about that miracle story that was not beautiful, but it
Yeah.
still was redemptive. And I think the main thing that I learned through that is that has been how God does redemption stories from the beginning. Ever
Right.
since sin entered the world, there's no perfect way for anything to be done outside of Jesus, right? And so his redemption story included him being overlooked. I mean, no record of his life for the first 30 years, really. A lot of his life is hidden. And then once we get to the highlight reel of the 3 years where he's doing ministry in the public eye, he was mocked, he was beaten, he was rejected, crucified on a cross. I mean, that is not a beautiful redemption story. When we hear the Cliff Notes version in church of the gospel now, it's like, thank you, Jesus, on Easter Sunday that you came and you died, and there's a cross with a beautiful white drape on it.
Mhm. Mhm.
But that redemption story was actually really bloody, and it was
Mhm.
really painful, and it was really messy. And that's how God does redemption. Like, he doesn't take away the pain and suffering, he enters into it. And
Mm.
so I think now in my life, when I suffer or when I go through a season where it's hard in mental health, where I used to think, "Oh, if I could get over this, then I could be, more purposeful in my life, or, I'd get to this better point in my faith or my relationship with God." Now I recognize, well, I'm in a really good position for God to come in and do some redemption work. Like anytime we experience brokenness in this life, it's not something that's bad about us. It's an opportunity to come closer to the goodness of God through relationship with Him. And I think in seasons of hardship and suffering, we get that like we don't on a mountaintop. You know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
that has been just a resounding echo in hard seasons. I have to remember, like, okay, God, you can work with this. You do really good work in my brokenness, and just inviting Him into it.
Mm. That was so powerful. Loved it. Loved every minute.
Mhm.
Um, You mentioned when we spoke before that you feel like God has redefined purpose for you. And
Mm.
so maybe switching gears a little bit, because I don't know where you're going to take this, but what does that mean? What does that look like for you? Because I think that's a really important um, statement of God redefining purpose.
Yeah. Yeah, this is great. This is what I'm so passionate about now in my life, because I did grow up with that very much performance striving mentality. And I had this
Hmm.
picture of what I thought a good Christian was. She reads her Bible every day. She prays every day. She goes to church every Sunday. Her kids are dressed in cute matching outfits on Sunday and family devotionals, and she can do it all. She's a working mom. She's got the ministry and she's present baking bread with her kids. And then I got into these struggles of my life and a little bit of dose of reality as I got older. And I realized, oh, like the mountaintops are not the majority of the story, unfortunately. And so if I had this idea that purpose happened on the mountaintop moments where everything is in my life is great and I'm on top of the world and I am rocking and rolling and doing it all, I thought that was purpose, but because that's not where we are most of the time, does that mean that the rest of life doesn't matter and like we can't live our purpose when we're struggling or on a boring normal Tuesday? No, that's not true. And we see that from the life of Jesus. Like he was purposeful his whole life, even in the 30 years that we really don't know anything about. But I think a lot of the times as Christians with good intentions, we see the 3 years that are recorded of Jesus's public ministry and we think that our whole span of life should look like that. And
Mm,
that's not that's not the reality. And so I think that I used to resist slow seasons or waiting seasons or hidden seasons or seasons where I'm just struggling because I thought that if things aren't moving quickly that it's getting in the way of my productivity, even in the sense
mhm,
of doing kingdom work, right? I used to think that, oh, if I'm in a waiting season, I'm not being very productive. I would be way more purposeful if I could achieve more, if I could do more, if I was making more money, fill in the blank, right? And that
mhm,
is just not God's picture of purpose. God's picture
mhm,
of purpose, if we're looking at the life of Jesus as our blueprint, is showing up faithful to the call in every season, and that can happen in the middle of the night when you're feeding your baby, or when you're speaking on a
mhm,
stage, or when you're hosting a small group at your house, or if you're working at the local coffee shop. I mean, it's completely changed my perspective because, I ran into one of those seasons where I was waiting and I was like, I'm doing all the right things. I'm trying to post on social media and I got this podcast going and I'm serving at my church and I'm really not going anywhere. And I wrestled so hard against that because I was like, God, why are you not answering my prayers? Like, where's the growth? Where's the progress? Where's the breakthrough? And he's
mhm,
like, why does that matter? Like, you can live the same amount of purpose here
mm,
as you can there. Like, there's no where we are at in the journey doesn't change our level of purpose because we're called. This is, I think that the main thing that I have to continually remind myself is that calling as believers is not to something that we achieve. Our call is to someone. Our call is to
mm,
pursue Jesus. And any purposeful thing we do in this life is actually just a byproduct of abiding in relationship with him and
mm,
co-laboring daily with his spirit, right? And so it was completely different from the image I had of a quote good Christian growing up that is always producing and always achieving and always working hard and never
mhm,
doubts and never struggles and all of those things. Like now I have a much more real, tangible, day in, day out picture of what faith can look like that's purposeful no matter what season I'm in, no matter what day of the week, not just on a Sunday
yeah,
morning.
yeah. I mean, that speaks so much to me in my story because I feel like where I have used more words like God's favor, like I have felt those things so deeply. I can remember a specific season of going to counseling because I could recognize I was like, I know that Jesus is like the good shepherd. Like
Mm,
I know that. I've can teach that. I do teach that. Like, but I could also recognize at the same time that I had this huge blind spot where it was like, but I'm having a hard time truly believing, like in my bones, that he's my good shepherd. And it
Mm.
was like, I know he's God of the mountain. I know he's God of the valley. But this in between time, what are we doing here? Like, what are
Right.
we, I like what's the purpose? What's the point of this? And for me, that season of it's not a great time and it's not a hard time, like of us just walking, like him
Yeah.
making me lie down in green pastures because he do
Yes.
be out here making us as we don't want
Yeah.
to. Um, like it felt like a lack of favor because if you don't
Mm.
have purpose for me, am I forgotten? And so like that is something that matters deeply to me, like that topic. and
Yes.
and because that is something that I really wrestled with, but I learned that w- if he only ever let me experience the mountaintop and the valley in the seasons that I had deemed quote unquote purposeful or
Mm.
important or worthy or seen, whatever
Yeah.
you want to apply to that, um, then he would it would kind of be um, it would almost be like he would be a god that required something of me.
Mm.
Now, of course, we've got to come to him and we have to abide. We have to make those decisions. And I love that you talked about that earlier. Like we have ownership here in mental health and there's this other
Mm.
side. And like that's so true in terms of grace. Like we have to come to
Yeah.
him. Like we have to receive that free gift. Like we have to make those decisions to walk with him. And at the same time, like do we believe that in the seasons where he's making us lie down that we're still just as valued
Mm.
as we were in the seasons that were busy or hard, or
Yeah.
he felt near because we were suffering, like,
Yeah.
and that was a powerful thing for me to be like, okay, like, do I believe that here when I don't see evidence of it right now, and
Yeah.
like, could his kindness actually be, hey, like you still have value to me even though you aren't doing anything right now, or it feels
Yes.
like you're not doing anything, maybe more pointedly. And
Right.
so, so good. So
Mm.
good. I mean, I feel like I could interview you on that specifically for another hour. Um, I think sometimes like having a litmus test for what is striving can be hard.
Mm.
And I'm sure you see this in ministry, talking to women, like we have a lot. I mean, look at all the hats that you are wearing
Mm.
in this season. Like you're working full time in the coffee shop with your friend, like you are doing this podcast, which let's be honest is a full-time job, and
Yes.
you're a mom and a wife. Those are full-time jobs. Like these are just the hats we know of. I'm sure there are other things
Mhm.
and places you volunteer in church that you can't even remember off the top of your head. But like, we have things we have to do. We have work. The Bible calls us to um, work as if we're working for the Lord,
Mm.
to do things with all of our heart. And so, how do we know, like, what's a good litmus test for people who are like, am I achieving? Am I
Mm.
striving? Or am I needing to work with excellence? Like where do you see a distinction that's helpful for people?
Mm. Yeah, I love that. I had a mentor years ago when I was healing from anxiety. Like I wasn't in a season of depression, that kind of thing, but I would still have times where I would get anxious about stuff and I would start to worry and it would get me overwhelmed and stressed out and all that. And she said something that I always come back to, and I think it's so helpful because when I was younger, would label feelings good or bad. And, Christians need to experience joy and peace and love and happiness. And if I'm feeling, pain, anxiety, sadness, those we don't really deal with. But all feelings are good. All feelings are a gift from God, and feelings are communicators. So, what I've learned is, and this is what my mentor said, she said, anytime you start to feel anxious, anytime you start to feel sad, anytime you start to feel overwhelmed, those aren't things that are wrong. It's how God uses our feelings to communicate to us that we've started operating in our own strength. When we
Mm,
are abiding with Jesus, connected to the source. So I get this picture of like a plant, right? We
mhm,
have the root, the stalk. I don't know. I'm not a plant girl, so I don't really know the terms here. But
Yeah, I'll go with it.
the main plant, the plant part, right? And then John 15 talks about how we're the vine, and then the Holy Spirit produces fruit. So it's like this
Mhm,
connection piece. We're just the
mhm,
middle vessel. And even in
mhm,
Galatians 5, when Paul's talking about the fruit of the Spirit, the Holy Spirit is the one who produces it. Our role is to bear it, which means to just basically
mhm,
hold it. We're just the
mhm.
conduit, right? And so, all of the good things that we want to experience in this life, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, love that one. Those are fruits that the Spirit produces in our life. So if what we are carrying in our life, like the fruit that we're bearing, if it is stress to the max, if it's overwhelm, if it's anxiety, that may be a signal that we are not staying super rooted or having this active relationship where the Holy Spirit has room to produce in our lives. Like, it's basically just the fruit indicates what we're connected
Mhm.
to and whether or not we're striving. I think that could be a good indicator there, just to
Mhm.
say, like, okay, have I started operating my own strength? Like, have I plucked my branch and started to do it on my own
Yeah,
over here? Because this fruit is kind of icky and it's not really doing anything good for me. And maybe we need to come
yeah.
back to the vine.
Yes, that's so good. I think we talked about this a few weeks ago on the podcast, but I can remember listening to an interview a couple years ago where I can't remember the guest's name at the time at the moment, but she was talking about how, like, talking about he's the vine and we're the branches and we have to stay rooted. And she called a friend who had, I believe, owned, I believe, a vineyard. And I don't think her friend was a Christian, but she
Mhm.
just was like, I need someone who knows these terms and knows like the science behind this. And so she called her friend and said, "Hey, is it true that all the branches need to produce the fruit is the vine?" And she was like, "Yes and no." And she was
Hmm.
like, "What, what do you mean?" And she was like, "Yes, like all those all of those branches need to produce the fruit is the vine. Like that is like if they have to be connected to the vine, they have to gain those nutrients to the vine. They have to
Hmm.
whatever like the rain, all those things have to come through the vine. But if there's not a trellis to hold
Hmm.
for that branch to rest on, and to hold that fruit up, like that branch is going to
Wow.
fall with the fruit that's been produced. And so she likened the trellis to your spiritual disciplines. And she
Oh,
was
that's
like,
good.
like if you are bearing fruit in this season that is heavy, I mean, it comes from heaviness with, I mean, harvest season is a lot of work. Like
Yeah.
harvest season's great, but it's a lot of work and fruit is heavy
Yeah.
on those branches. And we feel that in ministry.
Yes.
Um, and so like you need a strong trellis. Like a 5 minute Devo might not cut it in that season.
Yeah.
Like,
Yes.
you know what I'm saying? Like you need a robust. And so like I loved that picture of like abiding in that season might look different than in another season where I'm like, all I can do literally is remain. All I can do literally is lay down and rest here. And then in other
Yes.
seasons where he's calling me to go and do, like, I have got to be in my Bible. I've got to be, like, I've
Hmm.
got to be getting enough sleep. You know what I'm saying? And so, like, I loved that picture. But just kind of bringing it back to your point of like, that all that starts with remaining in him and like the
Hmm.
season where he had, like, to me, that illustration like marries the striving and the performing with like redefining purpose. Like, what's your purpose that he has for this season? And you still
Yeah.
have to remain in him, whatever that trellis looks like.
Yes, that's so good. I think that's the perfect illustration. Yeah.
Well, I can't claim it, but I do like to use it. So,
Yeah. I love that.
Hannah, I want you to talk to us about your ministry and your podcast because, I mean, it is a lot. Like, for someone who has a podcast, like, I can speak to that. It's a lot of planning. It is a lot of sometimes discouragement. And does this
Mhm.
still matter? Is this still worthy? Like,
Yeah.
you're when you have to take time out of other things that you're doing to work so hard to make it happen and scheduling and finding guests and editing. I don't know how much of it of all this that you do, but I know at some point all of it, at
Yep.
some point we do all of it at, maybe some of it's outsourced now, but I mean, those things have to be worthy for us to keep going. And so I
Mhm.
want you to talk about that some, but first, tell us about your show. Why is it called that? And what was the vision for starting it?
Yeah. So when I wrote my book about my story, it's called Waking Up Living Open, and it's been a long time since I wrote it now, but the whole the core message of that book is about our testimonies. And I remember hearing a message when I was in college, and it was breaking down the biblical context, like the word study of testimony. And when we hear testimony today, it's like, oh yeah, telling the story, saying it again, saying what God has done, sharing your testimony, right? But when you
Mhm.
look at the original context, it actually means to do it again. And so when we share our stories, that's why there's so much connection. Like we connect to a story, to a testimony. It does something in us because it's releasing the same power that worked in my life when I'm sharing my testimony to do it in other people's lives. It means to do it again. And so after
Mm.
I wrote my book, I was like, how do we keep this thing going? Like I started having conversations with other women, and eventually I started By Words just as a community group, like a hub where women could come and talk about what does this look like in everyday life? Like when I'm not on the mountaintop, but I still want to be intentional on my faith journey, like how do we do this? And so By Words comes from the verse in Revelation where it says, we overcome by the blood of the Lamb and by the words of our testimony. And it's this idea that our salvation and our overcoming in this life, being in the process, is twofold. So the first part is that we overcome by the blood of the lamb. That's the finished work of Jesus. It's already done. It's sealed and saved. Like we are good to go in that area. And
Mm.
then we continue overcoming by the words of our testimony. And it's this beautiful ripple effect of healing when we share our stories and when we engage with others in the process. And so I basically, from that community group and hearing other people's stories, put it in a podcast format so we could just continue the conversation. So that's what it looks like today. And it is
That's
just my
wonderful.
favorite thing ever. It's so fun.
What season are you in? I mean, when did you start
Oh my
this?
goodness. Okay, so my show doesn't have seasons. I'm just like
Okay.
rocking and rolling
I love that.
as I'm able to. I did take a break when I was like going through a lot of my healing with miscarriages, but in
Mhm.
May it will be 5 years.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
wonderful.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank
That's
you.
a huge
It's been
milestone.
awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And I love like just allowing yourself, like I used to say sometimes, and I still think this, like, and podcasting is always changing, but like, I feel like podcast is almost like the new blog. Like it's what you want, like, I love that some
Yeah.
people have short seasons and ours is longer. And I love that you're like, I just try to do it when I can't. Like, that's, I think that's a word for somebody who feels like they want to start something and don't know how to make it look just like this
Yeah.
other person's. And it's like, it doesn't need to.
Yep. Yes, so
Um,
true.
so, okay, so tell us about what that looks like for you to keep going. Like you said, you took some breaks. Like, do you ever
Mhm.
feel the discouragement of like, Lord, are you still in this? Do I still need to do this? Is anyone listening? Like, do
Yep.
you have days like that?
Oh my goodness. 90% of my days, if I'm being really honest, it's good and hard work, and you know how it is.
Mhm.
But I feel so called to this space in the sense that I need these conversations. And every time I have a conversation with a guest or I sit down to record an episode, I'm like, "Ah, man, I needed that like every single time. And I don't always see the return. I feel like in the podcasting world, it's really hard because you don't get the same kind of engagement or interaction with listeners as you would maybe on a social media post. And so there are days when
Right.
I'm like, does this matter at all? Is it worth it? Like, this is a lot of work. Is anybody listening? Does
Mhm.
anybody care? Is this making a real impact? I mean, this is just something I'm doing for fun. I don't get a paycheck from this. But
Mhm.
then you get those messages from someone who says, hey, I listened to this episode and I can't believe it. Like, I have been struggling with this, or I'm so glad you said that. Me too. And it just reminds you it's worth it for the one. Like, it's a lot of work
Mhm.
for the one, but
Mhm.
that's the kind of God we have, and so on the hard days, I just remember, you know what? I may not see all the impact,
Mm.
but I love it and it's impacting me. Like, I love the connections you get to make in the space and the stories that you get to hear and
Mhm.
celebrate the testimonies. And so, yeah, it's been very interesting. I feel like my first 3 years of podcasting, I was clueless. Honestly, in the beginning, I was like, I don't know. I'm just a girl with a mic and I'm going to try to figure this out.
Yeah.
But now that we have come a long way and God has really, I've went through a lot of life during these past 5 years and God has really
Mhm.
done a lot in my heart. And I feel like he's refined my message, which has been a really sweet thing. So I feel like By Words, the podcast, has kind of grown up with me in the past 5 years
Yeah.
of my faith journey. And in that, it's been sweet to kind of have this smaller community go with me in the journey because now that there is a little bit more visible growth, I'm like, well,
Mhm.
this is no surprise. Like, I can take no credit. Like, I've been doing the work, and at the right time, God got it into the right ears. And so I don't know. I'm just holding on for that and just trusting that, as long as I feel called to the space, God will get it where it needs to go. And that's
Yeah.
hard because like I said, I'm an achiever and I do tend to connect myself to the outcome and the result. And I love the numbers. But
Yeah.
yeah, I'm just in a season of learning to be faithful, even when I don't see what I want to see yet or even at all.
Yeah. Man, I mean that's relatable to everyone listening because whatever the thing is that they feel called to do that they're working towards, like we are all working towards something and doing his work along the way. And so
Yeah.
just so powerful. Man, Hannah, thank you so much for all of it. It just, I mean, I could continue asking you questions for another hour, but I know you do have other things to get to. But thank you so much for coming and for just being so open and honest and vulnerable because it was powerful.
Thank you so much. I'm so grateful to have spent this time with you today.
Thank you. And thank y'all so much for listening in. And we will see you next week on the Saltworks.
This is my story. This is your story.